Digital 410 Media proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts, Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Dennis Blocker.
Joining us now for this one-on-one interview. Actually, it's a one-on-two. When I say one-on-one, I mean Jeff and Dennis aren't here. I'm very thrilled. You know, we've had a lot of people on this podcast, a lot of authors, screenwriters. We get to talking about research, how to research to do a book, or research on how to get all the authenticity for a screenplay, or even researching your relatives and the role they played in the war. But I think, despite the fact we've had Luke on here multiple times, I think it's the first time we've had the opportunity to talk to two gentlemen who've done research, but not for a book, not for a screenplay, but something just as important, if not more important, to this hobby. And that is bringing artifacts back from the dead so that we can wear them as part of our impressions. And I'm wearing the one we're going to talk about today. So joining us right now to go down the whole story of how this came to be, what it goes into reproducing authentically stitch correct garments from World War II for modern day use. Join us now is Charles, I love this part, Charles W. McFarlane. You got to keep the W. You know, my name's Donald Preston Abernathy, and I used to joke around as a kid. That's not the type of name you can put on a mailbox in front of a double wide trailer. Donald Preston Abernathy. So Charles W. McFarlane and his friend Josh Kerner. Charles, how y'all doing tonight?
Doing great.
Doing pretty good.
You know, speaking of stellar names, I was one generation from being a third. My grandfather was Donald Preston Abernathy Jr., but then my father was Glenn David Abernathy, and then I was Donald Preston Abernathy. I was so close to actually being a fourth, because it was Donald Preston Abernathy Jr., then my dad. I could have been fourth. You definitely can't put that on a mailbox in front of a trailer.
Most
but
certainly.
I digress. Gentlemen, let's talk about this awesome 2 episodes in a row now I'm pointing out that I've been wearing this. The jungle sweater. And first thought is, fellas, why not just go online and type in World War II reproduction jungle sweater and order one off of eBay somewhere? Why go through the hassle of recreating this? I mean, they're all over the place, clearly, right? I mean, I see them on Amazon, I see them on Temu, I see them. Oh, wait a minute, no. Actually, when I was researching this show, after I got this one, I had that same very question. I saw one that said World War II jungle sweater, and I noticed it had the thick vertical cords like an Irish garment, holes in it. I was like, no, that's more like 1980s military sweater. So why go through the hassle of recreating this when you can clearly just buy them any old place?
Do you want me to take this one, or do you want to go, Josh?
I'll let you take this one to start off with.
I mean, I think simply, like, I think there's only been one reproduction run of jungle sweaters, and that was from, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, that was QMI, right?
Yeah, QMI did a very, very, very small run like 6-7 years ago, and that was it, a real flash in the pan.
Did they do that for a movie production?
I don't think so. I think they just did it because the guy wanted to have them, and I don't think he probably was small enough that it was like the minimum size as like a test strike from whoever his manufacturer is overseas, and that's why it sold out so quickly, was that there wasn't much to sell, and because nobody really expressed interest in him at the time, he had no real inkling to go back to that well.
Because I was thinking the other day,
and I think it's kind of something that's kind of a paradoxical, I think, in a lot of repros, which is we get a lot of repros of the stuff that you can find relatively easily, and it's the stuff you can't find at all that we don't get any repros of, because usually there's not one knocking around for someone to take apart.
Well, that's the thing that Jeff and I have kind of been talking for years about World War II content, especially when it comes to television. It's like, yeah, there's plenty of TV docuseries on D-Day, and there's plenty of them on, Bastogne and Operation Market Garden, and there's, but we try to talk about topics that you can't hear everywhere else. And back to what I was saying too, is I was thinking the other day, I was like, well, has there been a modern day movie, World War II? Well, now when I say modern day, I'm talking like 1970s and up, because clearly anything made from the 40s and 50s, they were using original gear. But I was thinking, has there been any World War II productions that featured men wearing jungle sweaters? Because obviously a lot of times when there are rarity reproduction items, usually they come from a production house or somebody developed them for a movie or a TV series. But I got to thinking, no, I can't think off the top of my head of a series where you see somebody wearing one.
No, and the one series that could have had them would have been the Pacific, but they don't really have them. And that kind of is the inkling for why we started on this road, was that the initial plan was to have them for the backhander event, which is was part two of what's going to be a quad event series following the First Marine Division from Guadalcanal through Okinawa, and backhander being essentially part two of that event series. And the First Marine Division getting a large number of these as part of that event, and Charles got intrigued by this and kind of decided to take the reins in getting it reproduced. And that's kind of was Dinkling what kind of got this project started.
Yeah, and like Josh kind of came. I mean, Josh said like, I kind of got invested in it, which I did, but I had just kind of started out saying like, oh, maybe I'll come out to backhander, and then Josh kind of approached me with this project in mind, like kind of my background, kind of I've worked kind of in and around the garment industry for almost 10 years now, on and off in different capacities, both like covering it in a media perspective and then also kind of working inside of it. So I kind of had kind of a loose network of people that I could call on for some help. And Josh kind of brought the project to me, and we kind of, we kind of ran with it together.
Yeah. And this was like a real good place to start, because so to give some historical background on this garment for people who aren't familiar with it, the jungle sweater is its colloquial name. Its official name was shirt knit olive drab, and it was originally developed for ski troops in 1942. The U.S. Army at first had a very heavy long underwear shirt, and the mountain troops that were being developed at the time, they're like, this is overly heavy. You can't really adjust how warm it is or cold it is when you're doing all this physical exertion. And the Army went about designing this lightweight knit shirt that has a button collar neck, and also is importantly an olive drab green, because at the time the underwear was still white, which lacks any camouflage qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And in August of 1942, Stilwell goes to Washington, D.C. on a stopover, eventually going to the China Burma India Theater to start to look at the Office of Quartermaster General for all the stuff that he will want to outfit jungle troops. And there hasn't really been any specifically designed jungle equipment besides some stuff that had been tested in Panama in late 1940 and 41. And going through there, he actually chooses a number of interesting items that will become things that we can't picture fighting in the jungle without. And one of those, there's the jungle food bags that start off for mountain troops. There's the poncho, which for a place that doesn't get any rain was initially designed for desert troops. Funnily enough,
I guess maybe for a sunshade, like if you guys had time, you hurry up and wait. Like, okay, dig your foxholes and then put up your sunshades.
And then he saw the jungle sweater, the knit shirt, and was like, this will be more useful than like a heavy wool blanket in the jungle, because it's hot in the jungle. However, when it rains, when you're in the highlands, it will still get cold enough, and a lightweight knit wool shirt will keep you warm enough and will not be as hot and bulky as a blanket and will not be as hard to carry. So they chose that, and it kind of just rolled on from there. So by December of 1943, it's not even a mountain warfare item anymore. It's purely a jungle war fighter item.
And that does make sense. When I lived in Ohio, before I moved to California in 2001, I was watching these California-based surfing contests, and you'd see the surfers on the beach wearing a hooded sweatshirt. To me, living in Ohio, I'm like, you're in California, for God's sakes. What's with the sweatshirt? Then I moved out to California, Yeah, the sun goes down, it gets goddamn cold. I would keep a hooded sweatshirt or three in my car at all times because you'd go out in the day, and if you go hit the bar scene at night, the winds blow off of the Pacific Ocean, which, by the way, is colder than hell. We lived in Long Beach, California, in a bungalow that was built in the 30s that did not have central air conditioning because we lived close enough to the water. I think maybe my dad moved there, and then I moved there after 9/11 when I got laid off from the ambulance plant, and that's when I decided to go to school for computers, which is what I've been doing for 20 years now. And so a few months after 9/11, I moved there, and my dad said, we don't have central air. I'm like, it's California. How do you not have central air? Well, we live so close to the Pacific Ocean, the wind would blow that cold water just like a swamp cooler. You say you lived in Louisiana for a while. You see the people who couldn't afford AC, you see videos all the time. You put a fan on a block of ice. Well, basically, the Pacific Ocean's a giant block of ice. That wind would blow in. And I think maybe 2 weeks out of the year, we would turn on a portable air conditioner. But other than that, we just crack the windows open. And so it makes perfect sense that in a jungle environment, especially a damp one, once that sun goes down, and especially after you've been sweating all day, you get cold to the bone. And as you were saying, anybody who's ever done a living history event, who's even slept out on the ground in Ohio, knows that when Sunday comes and you pull that wool blanket up, you have every leaf, twig, stick, spider web stuck to that thing. They're unwieldy and they're Velcro. And so it makes sense that if you can minimize, if not alleviate, wool blankets and find an alternative to that, they get heavy, especially when they're wet, and B, they get snagged on everything. And so it makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Josh kind of alluded to this too when he was kind of talking about how they were adopted, but kind of, you hit on it, right? Which is that when wool's wet, it insulates, as opposed to cotton, which would be like, the HBT uniforms, right? Like these wool knit shirts are going to insulate you in the damp and in the cold in a way that no other kind of cotton garment could possibly do.
And no one says it better than Robert Leckie when he's explaining the goofy look on his face when he's laying on his cot wrapped up in his wet blanket and he's smiling because it's so warm, because there they are in the jungle. They've been freezing in Cape Gloucester, but he discovered that nothing's warmer than a soaking wet wool blanket. And so he just laid there like a kid on Christmas, just snug in his wet wool blanket.
Yeah, and so these got, like I said, really popular. They became part of the Army's jungle clothing list, which meant that the 1st Marine Division got a large number of them in preparation for the invasion of Cape Gloucester. But Army troops wore these from the jungles of Burma to Bougainville, and the Marines wore these not only in Cape Gloucester, but through the end of the war. We know, for instance, John Basilone specifically had one, and there's film footage of them unloading John Basilone's haversack after he was killed in action on Iwo Jima. Yep. And one of the first things they pull out of it is his jungle sweater. So these were used from Cape Gloucester through Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the whole time frame of the war.
And let's not overlook, and I was talking to Charles about this on Facebook, because I got into the Merrill's Marauders a few years back, and I wanted to work on an impression. They were used in Burma, and it's actually pictured and explained in this little cute thin book plus the novel I have, that basically the soldiers could wear whatever they want. They had to carry a certain amount of ammo. They had to carry an M1 Garand, and I think they could either wear boots or jungle shoes. But as far as the pack goes, they could choose whatever pack they wanted. Most of them chose a musette bag, and most of them had a jungle sweater, HBT jacket, the HBT pants with the cargo pockets on it, leggings, boots, and Daisy May, as well as their helmet. And then when it came to fighting knives and machetes, the machetes basically everybody had, but they packed everything in and out on mules. And so they relied heavily on their jungle sweater, because they spent, for the kind of like the Raiders, they had a short shelf life, but while they were in action, they were more self-contained than the Raiders were. They were dropped off and left alone.
Oh, yeah. And for sure. And the usage and love affair that the military had with these didn't end with the war. For instance, here I have my collection of jungle sweaters, and this one is an original that was manufactured in 1948. And then this is...
Hold that up again. Hold that up real quick for our YouTube audience.
And let me get a good view of the label here.
That's what we need. Yeah.
We'll get to that later, because Yeah, we'll get to the label later. Maybe that's where that came from. That's where
Yeah.
they saw that.
And then another one, and you could kind of see from the color, they even made it into Vietnam, and they stopped producing them in 1967. And the Vietnam ones are distinguishable because the World War II, the post-war ones are this brown OD number 33 color, and then in the 1950s they switched to OG 208, which is this greener color that's different than the olive drab of the World War II. But
Now,
these were used in Vietnam right until the adoption of the tricot nylon sleep shirts that everybody is familiar with and sees all the time in surplus shops. So and once you see the sleep shirt, you kind of see the common heritage, but it kind of shows like this was a really popular, useful item, and you could see that today in how many times you could go to the Smart Wool catalog or whatever and see essentially the same product being sold to hikers and outdoorsmen for almost exactly the same purpose, a lightweight wool shirt to use in the outdoors that will keep you warm despite when it gets wet with sweat and everything like that.
now, with the exception of the color change, as far as
Yeah.
cut, materials, buttons, was there any major improvements, for lack of a better phrase, or deviation from the original?
So yeah, so the changes, so there's changes in the colors, of course. There's changes in the buttons, and the buttons change both in color that kind of mostly correspond to the color change of shirt. So when it's OG 208, they choose a color that matches the color of the shirt. When it's OD number 33, they choose a color that kind of more matches the color of the shirt. But early during World War II, the color changes, even though the shirts stay mostly the same color, and it mostly has to do with the specific type of plastic that they're using. It's going from a vegetable-based plastic to a more synthetic plastic as the war is going on, which we replicate in having go. So this is actually the original that we sent to China to help get these reproduced, and it sacrificed a button and some stitching on it. And you could see they replicated the early color here. Here's the reproduction. Got it pretty much dead on matched.
While we're talking about buttons real quick before we change, did
Yeah.
the Vietnam era continue with the 2-hole button, or did they say let's go 4-hole for longevity and durability?
Nope, they continue to use the cat eye buttons.
Okay, so they still did, because I know like on the Vietnam era like blouses and stuff, don't they use the 4-hole buttons on a lot of that stuff?
Yeah, and when they do the tricot sleep shirt, they use the 4-hole button as well. But yeah, so this is the early war. This is another early war one that has the lighter color, and like I said, it's just a change in the formula of the plastic. But the biggest change in cut is the earliest war ones are about 1.5 to 2 inches longer in the body to make sure that they kind of stay tucked in, which gives them a really long look. While the later Vietnam
Yeah,
one,
there you go. Yeah.
Now, let me say,
are
as somebody who's
significant-
6'5", I can appreciate a long waist.
so you could see, here's a Vietnam one,
Great for concealed carry, by the way. Go ahead.
my World War II one.
Oh wow, that's tremendously shorter.
Yeah, and
Try to continue, Josh.
and I don't know. I've never gotten to handle QMI's reproductions. I don't know how many other people kind of knew of that change before we kind of delved into this project. And I think being able to make sure we have the very early one that actually has the extra length, which makes it more usable for tall guys in the hobby, which often guys are at the short end of the stick, is kind of nice.
Let's take a.
I don't know if we're gonna get into it, but if we go, kind of talk about kind of how we got.
Well,
these
that's what I was
made.
getting ready to say. Let's go ahead and
Yeah.
pause the conversation. Let's go ahead and put the cart back behind the horse. When it comes to you guys having this conversation, like, hey, we got this World War II event coming up. Which, by the way, I'm not slamming my ETO living historians, but I got to say, from the last 5 to 6 years, from doing some marine events or dreaming of doing some marine events and being part of the conversations on Facebook, marine events are more about authenticity when it comes to uniform than the ETO guys are. And I don't know if that's just something that has to do with the Marine guys or what, but like I know when we did Tarawa and Peleliu down in Alabama, our uniform codes were very strict. It had, you have to have the right color piss cutters, the right canteens, and all that. So when you guys came up with this idea, hey, these sweaters existed, they were issued, they're not available, but we want this authenticity. How do you guys go from having that conversation, whether it's over some beers, over some text messages, over whatever, to how do we get the ball rolling? Because everybody has great ideas. Great ideas come in the night, and either you get up and you Google it and you find out 10 other people already did it, or you say, I'm going to do this, and then by Friday you moved on to the next thing. How do you guys get from this conversation to actually getting this done, and what's the steps in between?
So I think the first two steps were the steps that I took, which was one, having, I had at this point 4 or 5 original ones in very good condition, which makes me more willing to send one off across the world to as a sample. The other big thing is, for a decade now, I've been going to various archives across the East Coast and digitizing documents relating to the Quartermaster Corps during World War II. And one of the documents I had scanned was the specification for this garment. And we're lucky that while many of the cut and sew clothing specifications are a little bit more general and hazy on some certain measurement details, the knit garment ones are extremely specific and give you all the major necessary dimensions, where it tells you how long this seam has to be on the sleeve, how long the body seam has to be, where the buttons are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, in very detail, and not just for one size, but for a whole schedule of sizing, meaning that someone like Charles can take that World War II spec document and kind of convert it into something that a modern manufacturer is used to working with. And you take that research, you bring it with an original garment that they can use for both color samples for the wool, for the weight of the wool, or the buttons, and to check off some more minor measurements against the spec sheet. And it makes life a lot easier, and allowed Charles to do what he ended up doing, and I'll let him take over from there.
I was going to say, clearly, yeah, Josh has clearly Josh has a high passion for garments and the history. Charles, totally. How do you get brought into this, and what part of this ball do you pick up and run across the field with?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think again, kind of like backing up a lot, Josh and I have known each other since we were 12. We've been reenacting together, since we were 12 years old. So kind of the history goes now. So
we've been doing this. Our friends enlisted in the Army.
Yeah. So, that kind of, we go back, a long ways. I think also kind of before we get to what I was doing, I think it also just speaks so much to kind of Josh's, kind of the way he does his research, right? Because you scanned this spec, 7 years ago, well before we knew we were going to do this project. And I think that's the kind of the part of it too, just being able to hoover up the information when you have access to it is such an important key to kind of we just got lucky in a real way. Because I think, Josh, I think you can attest to this. I think the archive where you got this spec from, I don't know if you could get in there today.
I do not know if I can, because of just the way things have changed and the personnel has changed over and everything like that. It was a lucky time, and I had a friend make it, so we were able to get most everything we could out of there in the short time we had.
Now, real quick,
so I think that's such a big part of this story is having that available. So so Josh comes to me. My first instinct, again, kind of as I said, I've kind of worked. I'm in New York City. I've worked in in the garment industry here and there. Mostly kind of I don't make things. I write about things. So that's mostly what I've been doing. But working with people who do make things quite a bit. So my first instinct was, all right, so let's get these made here. Let's get them made. Maybe we can find a close enough jersey. We can find someone who can make these. Maybe I was working with a company at the time that was doing a lot of knitwear in Peru. I thought maybe, that would be a good, bet. But really kind of what it came up to was, we couldn't find something close enough. We couldn't find The order minimums were too high, was another one. And frankly, for what it is and for the people who are gonna, be our customers, it was gonna be too expensive.
Let me pause you right there real quick.
Yeah.
Because that's a key point. Too expensive. I remember about 10, 15 years ago, probably about 10, I was reading a Reader's Digest. And the author of the article was writing about another article that she had read, and she was interviewing a pretty prominent fashion designer in New York, and they were walking through her New York-based production plant. And the interviewer noticed and said, hey, try to, interviewers love the gotcha moment, right? At least nowadays they do. And she said, hey, I can't help but notice that all your seamstresses seem to be Asian or Hispanic. Do you do that because you get to pay them cheaper? And she said, no, I do that because American schools no longer teach home economics and Americans don't know how to sew. And so with that dying knowledge comes a bigger price tag. And so when you're doing it here, regardless what your personnel is, you're going to pay them a livable wage, especially when you're making high quality stuff. And the less that knowledge is around, the more valuable it becomes. And so the price tag. And so a lot of people, and perfect example, not World War II related at all, not garment related at all. I was watching Mike Rowe's podcast, and he wanted to do an episode on bobbleheads. And he wanted to have some bobbleheads made for his school that he does for fundraising to provide job training for people who want to go to school to learn to become welders, mechanics, what have you. But being Mike Rowe, he said, I want my bobbleheads made in the United States. And he reached out and he said, I discovered that bobbleheads are actually hand painted, they're hand carved, and each one takes a person to do. And even though the company I found in Philadelphia, they do all the design work, all the carving in clay, but because each bobblehead has to be hand painted, they do it overseas. Otherwise, no one's going to pay for these bobbleheads. They'll be $180 a piece. The company agreed to have X amount of them painted here in-house. But yes, the truth is, especially when it comes to garments, you live in New York, the garment district ain't half as big as it once was. And the people who are producing it, once again, you want to pay your people a livable wage, the price is going to go up. And so another perfect example, I bought a K-bar folder off eBay. I got my K-bar knife from my World War II, my Marine Corps impression, the fixed blade, but I bought a folder. Opened it up, and right on the blade said made in China. I was like, well, that's suspicious. So I emailed K-bar, hey, I got this K-bar folder, but it said made in China. I just want to make sure I didn't get ripped off. This isn't bootleg. And they said, no, all our fixed blade stuff's made in the United States, but sadly, our folded blade stuff, just to keep cost affordable and because of manufacturer availability, they're all made over in China. So it is what it is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to other industries, but I can say, especially in the garment industry, there's a lack of there's a lack of workers, obviously, kind of as you mentioned, but also, I mean, we're getting to the point where there's a lack of machinery and institutional knowledge, right? So, I mean, I think a really great example would be like if anybody's into like raw denim, right? Like, an American kind of classic that you can't really get.
I want those red line Levi's
denim made in the United States anymore because the looms aren't here.
Yep.
Like there was one mill that did it, and now they're gone. And all of the machines are mostly in Japan now, right? So if you want like kind of your classic American denim, that's where you need to go, right? So I think that's important. And I think something else too is that like I think people can get a little hung up sometimes on on kind of where like made in America versus somewhere else. But I think the quality kind of around the world, can speak for itself, which is you can get good quality stuff made, essentially anywhere, and you can get real like shit quality stuff made essentially anywhere. So kind of like, getting back to the jungle sweaters though. So kind of we were faced with this impasse. I mean, again, I think, this project took way longer than, we all expected. So, I think kind of to ruin the ending a little bit, we did not get these sweaters in time for Backhander. So, we started that project, maybe like, 5 to 6 months out, I believe, from Backhander. And, we thought
around this time time last year.
Yeah, exactly. It was around this time last year. I remember because I was working on, I was trying to do this and work on my thesis at the same time for grad school, and it's kind of balancing a lot. But so basically we were confronted with this thing. So all right, so what could we do, right? We can't get these things made here at a price point where we think people are going to buy into them. So that price point, by the way, was like looking at like upwards of like $300. For example, right? So not only do we don't have the capital to put up to get to that stage, but we also
500 of them.
Sorry?
You needed like 500 of them, and each one would have cost $300 each. It was like, okay.
There's no room for margin in that.
Exactly, yeah. And it also, frankly, would have been a lot more labor intensive for us too, because I think, part of what was great about working with Bronson is that, and I'll kind of get to that now, I'll kind of fast forward. So, I cold reached out to Bronson. And I kind of I sent them a DM on Instagram, and I kind of just laid out the argument for, this is who I am. This is the kind of stuff I've been up to. This is a product that, I think you guys should bring to market. The reason is because no one has made this before except for this very limited run. When I think about people who they are trying to emulate, I'm thinking about people like the Real McCoys or Buzz Rickson. Neither of those companies, kind of the gold standard for, high-end repros. Neither of those companies have touched this product. This could be a really interesting, product for you to bring, to the space. So they were interested, which was great. And basically what I did from there was and Josh alluded to this already, is I took the government spec, the quartermaster spec from 1942, which is what, maybe 10 plus pages, would you say, Josh?
Yeah, that's about right.
And that, and again, Josh kind of alluded to this. It doesn't just lay out kind of how to make the garment. It lays out how to, how we're going to fold these things, how we're going to bale them into a size tariff, and how we're going to put them in a box, and how that box is going to get labeled.
Stuff that Bronson doesn't care about.
yeah. Stuff that I don't care about, but so,
there's only one person on this call that cares about that in any shape, way, or form.
Yeah. So
it's funny you say that, because
I pour through this document.
Yep.
And basically look for the things that are relevant for a modern day tech pack. So a tech pack, kind of maybe I'm not the best person to explain this, but essentially what it is, it's not a pattern, but it is a kind of, it's mostly on the way it's done now. It's mostly a spreadsheet, multiple, slides on a spreadsheet. And it's just going to kind of lay out the real, bare bones to details of what this garment is, right? So again, we're not doing a pattern, right, which would be your outline, but you're going to say okay, so for size 40, it's going to be 19 pit to pit. This is how to measure pit to pit. Here's a diagram of the, this is all the stuff. This is the kind of buttons we need. This is the button placement. It's all that kind of stuff. But there's a very clear template that's used in modern garment manufacturing.
How do you make that conversion? Because I have found that when it comes to measurements, things have changed over the years. For example, if you go a couple years ago, I found a pair of new old stock skivvies. Guy had a bundle of them. I ordered a pair of size 35 or 36s. That's what I wore at the time. Turned out in 1942, I was a size 40, a size 36. And so how do you, because I guess maybe because you're experienced in the garment industry, how do you know the adjustments to make from sizing? Or was the original document just based off of pure math in inches and centimeters? So
the first rule that we kind of had going into this, and I think what a lot of people have said how kind of great the sweaters look kind of side by side as far as the knit and everything. But what I really kind of get jazzed about, which is that they measure exactly as the specification laid out. So from the very beginning, we were not going to mess with the original measurements. And Josh can speak to this a little bit more, but essentially no one has ever made a reproduction based on the paper specifications, having it in hand, right?
That's awesome.
Everyone has kind of done the thing where you take a garment and you cut it apart, and you kind of
reverse engineer it.
You cut apart a 40, for example, right? You have a pattern from a 40. Let's say a wool shirt, right? And then you bring in someone called a grader, and that grader is going to look at that, and he's going to make the adjustments to the pattern for the different sizes, up and down, right? So that's a whole job that someone has, right? That's all they do is pattern grading. But when we had the measurements, we're going to say we do not want to mess with these at all.
Don't deviate from the recipe.
Yeah,
exactly.
We want grandmother's
our
pie
size
here.
40 measures out to that size 40, to the original size 40, right? Something that we kind of bumped into with Bronson and kind of caused one of a handful of like small delays in the process was they were adamant about shortening the sweater, right? Because they were like, these things are really long.
We want them long.
Because again, you have to think about what they're thinking of, right? Which is they're thinking about more like casual streetwear, kind of, again, like a Buzz Rickson type audience, right? But like that's not what we're going for here, obviously. So we kind of had to have a real back and forth. And what they decided on is they were going to do our run of 150 to our exact measurements. And then the next ones they do, they're going to do their thing.
Which is fine because that makes yours all more sought after and for what we do more authentic. And it makes me feel lucky that I got in on the first run.
Yeah. For sure. And I think one of the key things is that, well, some reproduction, to go to Charles and grading, some reproduction companies have bought, instead of just 140, they've bought in like a 40 and a 42. But the thing is garments get washed.
Mm-hmm.
Garments stretch from use. There's always tolerances and tolerance stacking. Sometimes you have garments where, and I own some of them, and it's funny where you get it, you might not know it, but you get a defect original where the person on the factory floor made an oopsie, and instead of putting 6 inches of room here, they only put 3 inches of room here. And when you have all those sort of problems, it might not just fuck up your size 38. It could that can then scale out where you mess up all the range of sizes. And there's one garment manufacturer, or they don't know what the steps are between a small and a medium and a large, and they just base it off of modern conventions. And there's a current, I'm not going to name the company, but there's a current company that just dropped a reproduction where their size large, it has the measurements for an original size small. And it's because they didn't understand how much bigger in the chest the size small was supposed to be because it was a winter garment. And that's the sort of problems that we were able to avoid by going with the original. And there was discussions, of course, with Bronson, and other reproduction have had these sort of discussions where it's like, well, how do we fit the modern man?
Well, I was going to say that. Yeah. I can imagine one of the things Bronson will do on their run, because even though they want to make timeless clothing that has a vintage look, they understand that modern day people have a modern day feel of what they think is correct. And as you stipulated, they're probably going to shorten the length, but I imagine they're going to lengthen the arms. Because I'm 6'5". I love the length. Now, I could sit here and say, well, the sleeves aren't long enough, but for what we do, that's the authentic length of the sleeve. But I have long arms, so my watch shows. People like to be able to bring their sleeves down and cover up their thumbs and do the whole hide the hands like their teenager thing. So I can imagine they won't go that long because they want to keep the appeal. But I can definitely imagine they'll probably want to add maybe 2 inches to theirs so that their mass consumers will have the modern day feel and appearance of a modern day garment with a vintage look, whereas we want the authenticity. If it has a shorter sleeve, maybe because the military didn't want your sleeve getting in the way, or they had a intention for the design to pair with the other uniforms that you're going to wear on top of this stuff.
And that's a kind of like that kind of goes into two things. One, you have the problem, and you're experiencing it, that, well, the U.S. military during the war made some garments in different lengths. Some garments didn't make in any lengths. And this was a one size fits none in terms of length. If you were between 5'7" and 6'1", this is going to be pretty damn close as a regular. But if you were outside of that range, if you're Michael Phelps, you're out of luck. But in the other way,
the P-41 trouser, not to cut you off, but the P-41 trouser is a perfect example of that. And it makes sense. They had certain waist size, but it was essentially one length fits all, because why, when you're trying to mass produce uniforms for combat, why retool to have 15 different lengths when you can have one length fits all? You give it to the guy and they go have it hemmed. You have it shortened and hemmed. And I was reading a post the other day saying, well, I got some P41s from somebody and they're super long. It's like, yeah, so you can take them to a tailor and get them hemmed to the appropriate length. When you buy wool trousers from a person, you're supposed, like when I bought my wool trousers, I found, I don't know if they're still around. They're awesome. They're a Vietnamese couple. They used to own a industrial grade tailor shop, and so they still had all their machines, but in their house. And when I picked up my hemmed wool trousers and I lifted the cuff, it looked factory. It wasn't like some crappy stitching. It looked like it came from the factory, and they were to the perfect length, and that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that a lot of reproduction companies, when they try to improve something, it's a uniform system and there's these stacking tolerances. Or sometimes the improvement that they make is an authentic improvement, but the Quartermaster Corps didn't make that improvement until 1945. And they've done something that was an authentic garment. It made it farb for any impression anybody wants to use it to. Or they assume, oftentimes for good reason, that their customer is really dumb and they try to outthink their customer's stupidity. And all those different things is setting yourself up for failure, because when someone points out, hey, this part of your reproduction is wrong, or I don't like this part of your reproduction, instead of being able to sit back and go, man, take it up with the Quartermaster Corps in 1943. I don't design the garments. That was fucking, Little John and Dorio back in the day. I just reproduced them. Instead, you go, well, I didn't like how this pocket fit in this way, and it interfered with the cartridge belt, and people were complaining. So I look like you back yourself in a corner where you can't make any real defense. And I think Charles was really good at holding the line. And whenever Bronson tried to make a change of sticking like, no, this is what it was saying in August of 1942. We're doing it as it was done in August of 1942, because they probably did it for a reason, and it might not seem obvious to us at the moment, but I'm sure the second we actually use these, it will become obvious. And also, it's the correct thing, and the correct thing is the correct thing.
Yeah, and something I think, kind of you're hitting at, Josh, which I think about all the time with this stuff, right? Is that kind of a lot of people don't know how garments are made, or kind of what the internals are like, but everyone knows, because again, reenacting is nothing but a very visual hobby, right? We know that when we put on say like a repro tanker jacket, right, and it doesn't look like any of the photos that we like pore over and study and we want to emulate. And we're like, man, like this thing doesn't look right. And it's like the reason why it doesn't look right is because this was not manufactured correctly to the right, it doesn't drape the right way. It's not bunching in the right way in certain areas that we are trying to emulate because someone was trying to think, 3 steps ahead. Yeah. And that's kind of the problem. Sometimes we want this stuff to fit in a way that, it's not the best. Because again, when we're looking at these photos and we're trying to get a certain look, which again, this is what this hobby is about at the end of the day for a lot of us, right? That's what's going to hold you up is people thinking too much about making these things.
And part of that is like manufacturers trying to work around the problem that you had that problem. People go off their modern jean sizes, like, oh, I'm wearing a 36 from Lee, I'll buy an original 36, and it being like, oh, the waist has gotten bigger. A 36 today is a 36 today is equivalent to a World War II 40, and them going, well, I'm just going to start calling my 36s 40s, which leads to a cascading problem of, do you do that right? It creates confusion with your manufacturer, and you might end up having the World War II 36 size pockets put on your modern 40 that you tried to have as a 36, but you called a 40 to make it easier for the modern customers, which create problems.
Your dimensions are off.
Or you get other numbnuts who actually do know their proper waist size because they have to wear suits, or they were paranoid enough that they took out a tape measure and measured it, who then go, well, I'm a 36. This is a 36. It's a reproduction of a World War II garment. I wear original World War II garments. I know what an original 36 fits like. Buy it, get it, and it's like, this is not an original 36, and then kvetch. And that's why I'm a firm believer is you're setting yourself up for failure and having a piss poor response when you make those changes. The key to success is just to do the original thing, because then any problem isn't your fault. You have dead people to blame it on. You could blame it on some colonel at the Quartermaster Corps 80 years ago. It's no longer your problem.
I won't mention the outlet, but there is one particular gentleman who takes after Josh, and he just takes all these frustrations out in a newsletter about all you assholes calling me about the color of my jacket's not matching my tops and my pants don't match. The shit didn't match today because all this shit comes from different people. Email. You know who I'm talking about. We won't bring it up. There's one particular gentleman who just puts it out in a newsletter, says, fuck all you guys, I'm over it. And the other thing that you have to deal with is people don't realize in 1939, 1942, when you measured your waist, you weren't measuring your hip bones, you're measuring above your belly buttons, because that's where your goddamn trousers go. I can't tell you how many events I've been to where somebody has ripped out the crotch in their trousers. Oh, these things are garbage. No, you're sagging them. This isn't 1993, and this isn't a hip-hop video. Pull the fucking things up over your belly button, cinch down your belt, and they won't rip out in the crotch.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us, we're kind of like saying the same thing, which is essentially that, like, the education of the consumer is like maybe one of the most important things that a reproduction manufacturer can do.
But you would think in a hobby where people spend time poring over photos because they want to quote unquote have their impression look just right, they would realize your zipper has you have a 12-inch long zipper on your trouser because it starts above your belly button. Okay, that's why your zipper is 12 inches long and not the 6 that's on your Levi's or your Dickies at home.
Yeah, I mean, Josh a few years ago did this great series on kind of like fitting the uniform for like for our 100th page. That was like what was that, like 6 or 7 years ago at this point?
Yeah, it was 6 or 7 years ago. And what I use is the U.S. Army had a somewhat similar problem early in the war, where civilian fashion fits were just different enough from the Army clothing fits that it was creating some problems. And they also, as opposed to being a small regular Army, and thus you had people that were in the Army forever and knew how Army clothes was supposed to fit, they were having to train people how to get people into clothing to fit the Army way, who may have only been in the Army for a month. So they actually issued out detailed Army regulations about how to measure and fit uniforms for the soldier. And basically, we took those Army regulations and created a photo interpretive guide to basically lay out in plain English what each step of that regulation is saying, so you can kind of go through and be like, oh, this is how the service coat is supposed to fit. And for instance, you were talking about sleeve lengths. Shirt sleeves were meant to kind of fall at the wrist bone, because on a suit today, you're supposed to have about a matchstick's width showing from beyond your suit jacket cuff. On an Army dress coat, your sleeve isn't supposed to show.
Yeah.
It was meant to fall at the wrist bone, and that also has knock-on effects about not getting in the way when you're doing stuff with your hands and fighting and stuff like that. And we kind of did that to help educate some people about like the proper fitment. And that's kind of like, I think important thing to keep in mind is that not a lot of people have kind of know that stuff. And I think more reproduction manufacturers should just try to get their consumers a little smarter.
I want to point out too, for the casual listeners who's listening, it's like, really, were people that dumb that the military had to create a document on the proper way to wear their clothes? We have to keep in mind too, these citizen soldiers, they grew up during the Depression. They grew up wearing a pair of trousers that may have been their older brothers that now they didn't have money. Their parents didn't take them to tailors. They weren't going down to Walmart buying brand new clothes. They were given their brother's hand-me-down pants and a rope, make it fit, roll up your cuffs. And so these guys didn't, a lot of them, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them growing up in the Depression, hell, when they got to the military, that may have been the first set of new clothes that actually semi-fit to their size that they may have ever experienced.
There's actually...
Go ahead.
I was going to say there's that, but I also think the same way that how the kids in high school today, how they wear their clothes is different than how you wear a set of your MCUs
Yep.
or whatever your dungarees are just different in fit. How a high schooler, going to, George Washington High School in Iowa was wearing his suit or clothes in 1941 is going to be very different than how the Army expects him to wear his service uniform in 1942. Because while the common fashion in Army clothing was probably more in line back then than we see in the common clothes and the Army clothes today, there was still enough of a difference to make a difference, particularly since the Army clothes then, particularly the wool service uniform for the U.S. Army and for the Marine Corps, was a much more heavily tailored and size-specific range of garments than the small regular, small short, medium regular, large long, etc. sizing that we have for BDUs today, where for the wool service uniform, you have everything from 32 extra shorts to like 52 extra longs and everything in between. And I think being able to make sure that they're getting the right size and it's fitting right and looking good, because a well-fitting uniform is not just important for combat efficiency in terms of having you being able to move properly, but is also important for morale, because a soldier that looks good in uniform is generally a happier soldier, and a soldier with good morale is a happier soldier, and a happier soldier is a soldier that's better able to win. You know.
Go ahead, Charles.
Just really quickly, I know we're kind of on a
Yeah,
tangent.
we have no time limit here, so just
But I just kind of to your point about kind of being the first clothes that someone might be wearing kind of coming out of the Depression or something like that. But when I was doing research on my thesis, I found this great kind of garment. I can't remember the exact publication, but essentially like a trade publication for the garment industry from basically towards the end of the war. The end of the war is in sight, and the topic of the article is basically like, how are we going to get these guys dressed after coming out of the Army, right? So what does the garment industry need to do? And one of the things that I think really stuck out to me in that article is they talk about like the average soldier coming out of the Army is going to be accustomed to a much higher level of craftsmanship of their clothing than they would have been in civilian life. And that's something that like the garment industry is going to have to rise to meet, because it's like, again, kind of, we can all kind of joke about kind of, nothing ever fitting, or like, everyone's the same size in the Army of 9, but like, that's not really the way the Quartermaster Corps was operating. And guys were getting accustomed to a very, very, like just a very high quality, uniform, right? And a uniform for basically every kind of weather condition and every kind of climate. And guys were coming out of the service ready to be, kind of served and dressed in a certain way that, the garment industry was paying attention to. So I think it is like, important to note how, basically, cutting edge the Army really was at the time.
And to that point, when the Quartermaster Corps did a survey of soldiers in 1944, one of the top questions was, are you happy with the fit and fitment of the uniform you're currently wearing? And something like 90% of the soldiers answered yes. That
crazy.
It was insane, which is not as insane as a baseline, but all the more insane to realize the full scale of human sizes that you are getting for. This was not a volunteer army. This was a drafty army that was taking in the full range of everything from short Nisei soldiers going into the 100th Battalion to large giants being recruited from the upper Midwest. And they were all being fitted in uniforms to a degree that they were like, yeah, I am happy with the way this fits. And it's an impressive logistical feat. And it's one of the things where I think not a lot of people really appreciate that. And it's one of the small things. It's like the ice cream ships during World War II that really speak to the industrial power and might and logistical acumen that allowed us to win the war. Could have just as easily said to the German soldiers and says, you have horses, we have General fucking Motors. What were you thinking? He could have easily said, we have 1,000 sizes that fit us perfectly, and we manufactured into millions, and you're using slave labor concentration camp inmates. What the fuck were you thinking? Our uniforms were union made. yours was slave made. Like, what the fuck? And it's
Totally.
Is it?
yeah.
Sometimes when I have conversations like these, I have thoughts I've never thought about before. And one of the thoughts I was thinking as you're talking about, Charles talking about post-war, these soldiers coming into civilian life and how they're used to wearing uniforms. I was born in 78. Seen a lot of movies, TV shows, commercials, advertisements from the 60s and 70s, and that fades away. And one of the things that stands out as Charles was talking about that, and to now, I just had this realization. I mean, I noticed it here and there of how far down the spectrum we've gotten from our distaste from uniforms in general life. You say we had military, and then if you go back and you look at TV commercials from the 60s, 70s, print ads, every trade had a uniform. If you were a milkman, you had a uniform, the white uniform, the white hat. If you're a mechanic, you had the blue uniform tucked in, the blue hat. United States Postal Service, they had a uniform. Janitorial services, everybody had a uniform, to the fact that industries such as Syntax uniform rentals, to when I worked at Wendy's in high school, we had to have the blue Wendy's provided pants. We had the little button-up polo that was gray with the stripes. Now you go to Wendy's and McDonald's, they're wearing t-shirts and jeans. Like, we've gone so far, like now we have such a disdain from looking like everybody else. Like, there's almost no uniforms at all. It's crazy how we went from every single trade had a uniform. Didn't matter if you're a milkman, a mechanic, a postal service worker, wearing the 3-piece suit if you're working in a business downtown. It's like every sort of representation, because of those generation coming out of the war, and as we got older in the hippie movements, and then the 80s and then the 90s, and then where we are today, we've completely gone the other way when it comes to wanting to wear a uniform.
Yeah, boy, do I have a book for you. Paul Fussell, who's a World War II combat vet, 103rd Infantry Division. Sorry, he wrote Uniforms, basically all about kind of like America's culture of uniforms, kind of from the 1940s to, I believe it was written in the 90s. And kind of more abstract ideas of uniform as well. Ideas of uniform and counterculture and things of that nature. But there's a little tenuous World War II connection, which is that he was a combat vet. It is.
To bring it back to your back and forth with Bronson with making sure they were following the sizing and everything like that in the work.
Yeah.
Sorry. I wanted to get back to that story for a bit. And
sure. I don't know, kind of where we want to necessarily go with the story of these jungle sweaters, but I think, we kind of won all those battles and it was great. I think honestly the biggest thing that kind of was the waiting was, a lot of times we were shipping back and forth. So they shipped us a sample.
Mm-hmm.
I had to ship a sample, had to ship it back to them. We were waiting for a sample of the material. Things like that kind of ended up just taking a lot more time.
Customs.
But we got there eventually. But I do think
everything was custom made. The wool knit was custom made.
You, Josh.
The buttons were custom made. The thing that made this as close as it was is that none of this was. And some reproductions do this, especially the lower end manufacturers. Go through a stock of fabric or knit, find something that's close, maybe re-dye it to make it a little bit closer and call it a day. Everything for this was totally custom made specifically for these jungle sweaters, which is why they got as close as they did.
Which one of you was responsible for the choice of material? And I bring this up for a very important reason. And I was going to say this earlier.
So I think that was really both of us. And that was something that I was really prepared for, because we kind of had kind of loose conversations with a few other reproduction makers about all right, we want to do this thing 100% wool. And basically that was a complete non-starter, right? But going into the conversation with Bronson, we kind of knew that we wanted it to be 100% wool. And that was something, honestly, from the jump, they never pushed back on. They were like, all right, we can do that. But price point wise, it's going to be, about the same if we did it, from cotton. It's not going to be that different. But what that means, though, is that your minimums are going up. Yeah. Right. Because they basically need to get yardage for, I believe, 500 jungle sweaters, which I was not prepared to handle.
Well, the reason I bring this up is people hear wool, the first thing they think is itchy. And depending on the quality of a reproduction wool blouse you got for your infantry, Some of them you wear without an undershirt and you're itchy and you're rubbing. I'm wearing this jungle sweater with no undershirt. I'm just what God gave me underneath, and it is not itchy. It does not. I don't feel like stitching digging in, because a lot of people hear wool like, man, when I wear my infantry blouse, if I don't have my under t-shirt on there, it's just driving me crazy and I'm breaking out. And I'm not saying I don't have sensitive skin. I'm saying the quality of wool that you guys and Bronson use to produce these sweaters, it feels like flannel. It feels like cotton. It does not feel like wool in any way, shape, and or form. And that is stellar.
Yeah, and that's something that Charles particularly noted. And I really didn't pick up on it because I was just looking at it as it was. But what Charles picked up on was that this is like, if you look at the wool described in the specification, this is extremely high-end merino shirt wool. This is the stuff that Smart Wool, which is famous for very nice, easy, comfortable, machine washable wool. I'm not saying these shirts are machine washable. I haven't tried it, and I don't recommend you try.
Don't
but
do
I'm
that.
saying, don't do that.
Listeners,
But-
please.
but yeah, but what I'm saying is that the wool that the Army was expecting these to be made out of during the war was supposed to be very high quality, lightweight, and easy to wear. And that was that's kind of what the wool industry was doing as a default during the wartime era. If you compare an original wool item to a modern reproduction wool item, that difference in quality is oftentimes readily apparent. But two, it needed to be super lightweight and soft in the hand, not uncomfortable, because the guys wearing these, particularly once it became a jungle item, were going to be wearing these almost certainly against bare skin in the jungle, and it couldn't be a hot, itchy, scratchy thing that is going to create skin problems that is going to get a guy out of the action. And Charles noting that and kind of pushing towards us doing that properly and being helped by Bronson, I think is really what made this
Kudos
one of
to
the
you,
best
Charles.
productions. And I say that as like the person who helped out, but I think I can say truthfully that I've purchased or helped with a lot of reproduction garments in my time in the hobby. And there's some reproductions that I kind of put on a pedestal of, barring none, this is just one of the best reproductions generally. And I say without really any ego that this is probably one of the best singular reproduction items I've ever seen. It's just so ridiculously close to my original that when Charles gave it to me, he put the reproduction and the original in the same plastic bag. And you had to take them out of the bag and look that, oh yeah, this one's missing the button because they cut it off to use as a source for the reproduction buttons, to really tell which one was the reproduction, which one was the original, was how close we got.
And I kind of going back to what you were just saying, and kind of one of your initial questions of kind of how do you take the quartermaster spec and kind of translate it. That was something that was a little new to me, which is kind of I usually have not worked in knitwear. It's not really something that I've spent a lot of time in, and kind of the 1940s technical terms for the grades of wool are slightly outdated by today's industry. So that took a little bit of kind of just like a little kind of a little research, not a lot, but just to kind of figure out kind of what grade of wool we're working with here. And that's, that was kind of, it did unlock a lot for us as far as, the quality. And I think, again, when it coming to bringing these, and marketing them and doing the pre-sale and then, kind of just selling them outright, that was something that I was hammering all of the time, and all of the communication was that this is not, we call it a jungle sweater. It's not a sweater. This is basically a merino wool base layer. And you can wear this on bare skin. It's super lightweight. If you hold it up to the light, you can see right through the damn thing. This is not a sweater, And I think and also just that it was a base layer. It's supposed to fit tight. It's supposed to fit tight and close to the body. And I've been really people seem to have gotten it, right? And kind of going back to educating the consumer, people seem to have really understand what we're doing here, and they understand that it's supposed to fit a certain way, and that it's not a heavyweight sweater, and they should size it accordingly.
Now, do you have an agreement with Bronson that if the demand is there and you want to do a second run of these, that they will go back to your specs, or are you going to be limited to their new version of it that they're going to release next year?
We haven't discussed it with them. I actually just kind of spoke to them, just last week, just over email. But We haven't gotten there yet. I mean, I think, essentially I would have to have, 150 people clamoring, for 150 more,
Sure.
because that's going to be, I already, originally they wanted me to take 200 of them, and I kind of, negotiated them down to 150. So I mean, they are holding the bag on the rest of the wool knit jersey that they did tell me they plan on doing jungle sweaters, but they do not plan on releasing them until, potentially next year.
Yeah.
So, they're taking their time. Again, I think something that honestly, I think more repro makers could maybe learn from Bronson on a little bit, which is that, they're kind of are following a slight, seasonal system of like, all right, like we're going to do these like, we're going to do these at a time that's convenient for us, and we're not just going to like have everything in stock all the time, right? Which I think can be a little frustrating for the consumer, but I think for the, manufacturer, I think can actually be easier. But I think, if there was if there was a lot of, if there was a lot of people clamoring for these, I would consider it. I mean, yeah, that's a big if.
It's, yeah, I think the part of the problem is that there's a finite number of people that want one of these, especially at this price point, and I think most everyone who wanted one has purchased one, and that there's going to be 20 to 50 people that are really wishing they jumped on the boat and are going to be really sad that they didn't jump on the boat. And,
well, you guys may
sometimes
also
that's just the way the
find
cookie crumbles.
you guys may
Yeah, I
also
mean-
find that there is a large demographic of people out there who weren't aware that this was a thing, that this was
Yeah.
an opportunity to get a pre-order in it. So, I mean,
we really tried to reach as many people as, like we posted basically, all of the kind of the reenactor hangouts on Facebook that we could think of. I posted everywhere from, the U.S. military forum, like the real forum, not the Facebook page, to the vintage leather jacket forum. Like, I was really trying to, cover all of my bases that I could. I mean, I will say, like, kind of when we were in the pre-sale, era of this, right? Like, there were numerous times where kind of like sales, pre-sales kind of like plateaued, where I was like, fuck, like we reached peak jungle sweater. And, I just got an order like, like last week. And I was like, so it's still trucking, which
so are you guys officially
been
sold
pretty
out?
happy with.
Are you
Yeah.
you're officially sold out?
Yeah, yes. There's chance that there might be like,
Some off
a half
sizes.
dozen, overflow. But if there is, that will, I will make an announcement to that effect. I'm kind of, but we are officially sold out.
Now, for two guys who have such a passion for garments as you guys do, if you decide to venture on a project similar to this again, is there a particular garment from the era, maybe World War One or hell, Korean War? Is there a garment you guys have kind of been toying around with, saying,
We've had
A, is
discussions.
there, would it be worth it, and B, is there demand for it, and what would that particular item be?
So there has been discussions of a number of different garments.
Yes,
And
there
we
has.
have the research for those garments. The problems that we've been more focused on, once again, is the logistics of how to get it made. In some cases, there's licensing issues that create hurdles.
Anything with an EGA on it?
To getting stuff made. And yes, it's something we've discussed, and I think with our kind of, it's given how much discussion we just had about all the research and time, but our no frills sort of like, this is the way the quartermaster made it in 1943, take it or leave it approach to trying to in terms of measurements and specs and everything like that, I think has some opportunities ahead. And Charles has a real unbelievable knack of just spotting these details and working with the manufacturers and seeing these projects through to the end, that I hope that like we'll have years of fun partnerships in this.
I mean, I think there's definitely some stuff on the horizon. I think, the two biggest things that I think, I think we're going to be keeping in mind is, one is, I think tethering a product to an event, does, it helps so much, right? Kind of like having having that built-in market kind of ready to go, kind of to get you off the ground, I think is just so important. then the other thing too is that, and I think, Josh and I might kind of differ on this a little bit, but I think, the way going forward would be, this was interesting to work with Bronson. I do think, the move would be to do our own, would be to produce our own stuff. Just because, it would cut down on kind of the timing a little bit, and it would also kind of cut down on essentially like, the back end cost,
Sure.
which, kind of, everybody was kind of, taking a slice of the pie in a way that kind of left us,
Everybody wants their beak wet.
basically just squeaking by on breaking even.
Okay, here's a fun thought experiment. And Josh, you'll get the advantage because you'll go second. We'll make Charles go first so he won't have time to think about it.
Yeah.
Money aside, order numbers aside, just fantasy island here. We're doing a thought experiment. What's an item that doesn't exist in current reproduction world that you would want to make, and what's an item that is readily available that you think you could make better? You go first, Charles.
Oh man. This is just because it's been on the mind so much, because it's probably going to be something that we're going to do in the future. Something that's not available that I don't think anyone's ever reproduced, is the Marine Corps, kind of mid to late war green boxers, right? So they're made from like a cellular cotton. So, people have made them. They've made them out of kind of just regular poplin or a kind of plain weave, kind of regular boxer fabric, but no one has reproduced them in the correct kind of like loose, open, cellular cotton fabric. And I think that's kind of something that, again, we have this built in, we have the Peleliu event coming up in the summer. We have Okinawa the year after. It's kind of a built-in market for it. I think that that's, a very doable thing.
And what's the item that you think you could do better that's readily available?
I'm going to say that I think Josh and I's are probably going to be the same. And it's kind of a no-brainer. It's going to be an M43 field jacket. It's just nail it. And again, we got the stuff for it. Again, you said, money is no object, which would be a big part of this too.
It would be, it's less complicated to build a high-end suit than to build a 43 jacket. Don't make me rant about the 43 jacket. The 43 jacket is the McLaren F1s of combat field garments.
Yeah.
G3 combat shirts. Eat your heart out.
What is it about the higher end currently available in 43 other than the fact that when you buy it, it looks like it's made out of polyester because it's got so much goddamn scarch guard on it? When I bought my M43s from World War II Impression, I looked like I was on my way out to a disco in 1983. I'm standing in a woods in goddamn Georgia, and you could see the sun shining off me because I got so much goddamn Scotch guard on me. Other than that,
Josh, I'll kind of give kind of my brief thing, and then you can kind of go into it. I think there's a few major things that have held back reproduction makers from nailing the 43. The first one is that there's numerous specs in a way that there aren't or should I say, there are numerous specs that actually create serious change to the garment in a way that isn't the case with other pieces, right? So you have all these specs. So again, kind of going back, way back in the conversation to what Josh was saying of if you took two size 40s with different specs and you didn't know that they were different specs, and you say, all right, make a size 40 out of these two, you're already done, you're cooked, right? And then also the way the sizing on the 43 worked is so, how many times have we all of us have seen this? I see it on eBay literally every day. It'll say, 43 jacket, 44 regular. And I'm like, oh man, I got it. It's my jacket. And you go on, it's like, no, it measures out to a 44 regular in that person's mind. Because again, the way that the 44s were measured out is not the same as, just taking a tape measure and it being 22 inches, pit to pit, right? So that's a big part of it, is just kind of the getting that right. And then I think Josh can talk more about the construction of the thing.
Yeah, there's so many little details in construction. So first of all, there's this internal suspension system that is literally hidden in the garment, unless you are a crazy son of a bitch, excuse my French, and that's one of them.
Yeah,
or you read the specifications, like someone in this video has. Or so there's that. Then there's other small minor things. So for instance, you're familiar, there's the liner and there's the external shell, but what a lot of garments miss out on is that there's an internal fabric that's put into the collar of the garment that gives it some more shape. And that's why so many reproduction jacket collars are so soft and wrinkly and crunch up and don't
And the curl at
have,
the ends.
when they're used, don't have that. I don't want to say stiffness because it isn't stiffness. I want to say like form, where it
Yeah,
still
form is the exact right word. Yeah.
I could, this is an original, I could ball up and stuff like that, and I undo it, and it still has a good triangular point. It still folds cleanly and with heft. It's not like just a soft
And your
form.
collar ends aren't curling up like elf shoes.
Exactly, and that's because
Yeah.
there's an extra piece of fabric that was sewn in there to accomplish that exact purpose. And there's all these little hidden details, and there's the grading and sizing and everything like that. And it's like a suit jacket. It's not just the
It is very much like a suit jacket.
there's all this stuff inside of it that's hidden from plain view, and you not just need a 40, you need a whole range of sizing to get an understanding of the grading. There's the multiple specs, like Charles said, and it means that if you fuck up one thing,
It snowballs.
it snowballs. So there was a reproduction of the 43 jacket where they messed up the second from top button placement on the fly. And because they messed that up, it meant that the collar, instead of being authentic, was like miniature. And you're like,
Mhm.
that that's so minor. That shouldn't really matter. And then you see someone put it on, and it's like kind of like the Seinfeld skit with the little white speck on the sweater. It's like all you see, and it's all the worse because it's the part of the jacket that's right next to the guy's head.
Yep.
Yeah. And this goes back to, again, something that we were talking about earlier, which is that a lot of people might not understand looking at a garment, what makes it fit a certain way and what makes it drape a certain way. But it's the kind of thing where it's like you put on that repro and you're wearing a repro and so does everybody else. And it just, because it just does not drape, does not hang on you the right way. And that's like the thing with the internal suspension system. Like, why should that matter? It matters because it totally changes the way the jacket falls on your body. And
Yeah.
again, like, you can just look at photos all day long and you're just like, I just don't get it. Like, why does my jacket not fit that way?
Why,
And
when I put grenades into the pocket, does it shift weirdly? Why does it like, and it, yeah. So my answers to those questions are actually different than Charles's.
wow,
Okay.
okay, all right.
Yeah. The
This will
number
be
one
interesting.
thing that nobody produces on the market, and if I was God King of the world and I had
Like if you
infinite
won the
money,
lottery tomorrow, like the Powerball, money
Yeah.
wasn't an issue, and time
it's
wasn't
gonna be
an issue.
it's gonna be shoe packs. It's gonna be shoe. I've been nobody will ever reproduce them. I've resigned myself to that fact, but I want shoe packs so bad, and it's because my one true love in terms of reenacting it has been the 100th Infantry Division. The 100th Infantry Division deployed overseas in shoe packs and fought in shoe packs until early March of 1945.
For the layman who's listening, what's the difference between a shoe pack and a boot?
So a shoe pack is basically the LL Bean boot gone to war. And
Yeah.
specifically we're talking about
Oh, a
shoe
duck
pack-
boot.
Yeah, we're talking about shoe pack 12-inch. And shoe pack 12-inch is different than the early war shoe pack low, which looked much more like a bean boot. It had a two-piece leather upper, had a different sole pattern, all this other stuff, which means that the reason it's never been properly reproduced is that you need a complicated multi-piece rubber mold to do the lowers. It has to be, and you have to have a separate one for each hole size. And and that's just, think about all the kvetching that At the Front was doing about having to get a comparatively simple but still very expensive shoe rubber mold made, and multiply that by an order of magnitude. Like LL Bean, just in the past 6-7 years, to the increased demand of bean boots, has only gotten a second set of molds for their duck boots, and they're LL Bean. That
Yeah.
gives you an idea of how expensive and out of touch getting a custom set of all the necessary sizes of shoe pack rubber molds are, let alone the manufacturing of the overly complicated compared to the simple one-piece leather upper of the bean boot of the two-piece sewn together style of the shoe pack. And it's why it's out of touch, but out of reach, I should say, for like of ever being reproduced. But why I would love to have it reproduced, because not only did the 100th Infantry Division unit during it most of its time in combat, almost every 7th Army unit used it during the majority of its time fighting in the winter of 44, 45, and even units that came to the 7th Army late in 44, 45 used them for a period of time like the 101st Airborne. It's a very necessary piece of footwear to tell the story of the 7th Army during the winter of 44, 45. The only options currently available are increasingly fragile originals. And
Which, yeah, I've destroyed 2 sets of originals in my reenacting career, and then one was just last year. So yeah, it's
one of
rough.
those things that once they're gone, they're kind of gone, and it's kind of sad because they truly never ever will be reproduced. And if I am proven wrong, if next week Bronson announces that they're making these, I will I don't know what I'll eat to really prove home how.
And he'll eat it here on the show. We'll bring him back.
I'll eat an original shoe pack.
I'll eat an original shoe pack.
What's the one item that you think you can?
And so investors, if you're listening, we are totally open to do shoe packs.
What's the
if you invested in Uber, but what if you're looking to be fleeced from your money? I mean, you're looking for a good investment opportunity.
If you thought it was a good idea to make electrical pickup truck out of stainless steel and now curiously concerned that it's rust in the rain, we got an item for you.
Man, I promise as a good return on investment to the investors in that project as the investors in Lyft.
There you go.
So what's the next item though, Joe? What's the
one you can
improve? Everybody reproduces, but nobody has done well. It's Jeep caps. I have the specification for it. It has detailed measurements. It has a drawing of the bill shape that you just print out, you place upon the fiberboard, and you cut it out. And I've sent it to manufacturers, both low end and high end, and all the reproduction Jeep caps look like dog shit.
The only two differences I've seen in descriptions is either A, you can order the cheap one with the cardboard in the bill, or you can order the higher end with a leather insert in the bill. But other than that, the cut and shape's all the same.
I've even sent it to a high-end company that makes some of the highest-end reproductions known to man. And when they released their Jeep cap, it was disappointing, to say the least.
Yeah.
It did, stay right there.
And I think this kind of goes to what what I was saying as well too, of if we're gonna do this, do more of this kind of stuff, we kind of got to do it. Because I think Josh's frustration, especially with the Jeep caps and also with other reproduction makers that he's worked with, in the past, where he's done a lot of work, done a lot of really hard yards, and then for it to kind of get thrown out at the end, we need to be able to kind of see from start to finish and make a product that we can be happy with.
So this is the said high-end reproduction Jeep cap that I sent them all the data package on. This is how it fits.
You look like Radio from MASH.
Yeah. Here is an original size medium, which this is supposedly an exact reproduction of. And this is how it fits. It's just total. It's not even. It just fits totally different. You could see it
yeah, I mean, the other one. The
one's like a 5-gallon hat, and the other one's a 7-gallon hat.
Exactly.
You're skating in a mall in the mid '90s. That's what.
And that's kind of the infuriating thing is that it's because this is another knit item. It tells you the size for everything. It actually gives you the exact build dimensions, and they still didn't quite match they didn't make the mark. And I'm it's kind of like when the teacher puts the answers on the board and you still flunk the test. It's what do I have to take the test for you? Is kind of the reaction. And that's kind of why of all the things that I think we could, like anyone could do it better. Just follow the specification.
Josh,
But
just
yeah.
because I want your head to explode this week, and I'm going to give you a homework assignment.
yeah.
Clearly, there's never been a more bastardized piece of military equipment in modern day fashion than the M43 jacket. I mean, people make it not even as reproduction just because everybody wears them on TV. It takes some digging. I found it before. You remember the TV show Lucifer that came out a few years ago? Guy, it was a USA special and it was on Netflix. Basically, he's the devil and he comes to town and he decides he don't want to be bad anymore. Reason I'm bringing it up, like the worst recreation in an M43 jacket, like the opening scene of like season 4, he's wearing some bastardized Hollywood, has the Vietnam era zipper. But here's the best part. For some reason, the costume production thought it would be cool, or maybe they bought it this way from the fashion designer, right? They thought, let's take this horrible recreation of a M43 jacket, and we're going to put fake silhouettes where the patches used to be. So you can see like there's a square of an, and it's clearly not even a military jacket. It's just a modern day recreation to look like an M43. The cut's all wrong and the zipper, but you see like a darker green where a nameplate would be, and then they have chevrons, but the silhouette of where the chevrons are way too high up on the sleeve. And so not only did they bastardize the M43, they put fake silhouettes from where it faded, and you can see the original color from where the chevrons used to be. But you can, there's a picture.
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a picture on Google. He's wearing this thing, and it's the most god awful recreation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because like you see the you see the evolution of the field jacket, right? Kind of going back to the 41, but let's, for the sake of this conversation, from the 43 through the 65, right? And clearly, like they're making improvements. Sometimes, I don't like the 65, but that's a whole other kettle of fish. But they're making these improvements, kind of going on, and then you have designers coming in, later on, and I think kind of reinterpreting, like taking like elements from the 51, elements from the 43, and elements from the 65, and kind of like making this like other field jacket. I do always find that kind of stuff interesting when you kind of have these this isn't a good example of this, but kind of like a what if jacket. There's a manufacturer, Mr. Freedom, which I think everyone kind of probably knows, and one of his kind of guiding lights of kind of the stuff he makes is well, like it could have existed, and sometimes it's interesting and sometimes it's not. Not saying his work. I think his work is always really interesting, but
I think one of the better, more mainstream manufacturers at this is Ralph Lauren, and I think it's because he actually has a very large reference collection, and a large reference collection is key. And I think a lot of these other manufacturers get themselves in hot water because they're like, I'm going to do a field jacket. They send their designer to like Joe's Army Navy. Yep. They buy the first field jacket they get, and they just work from that. And I think in many ways, having a fuller understanding of all the jackets and all the things like that actually gives you a more interesting perspective to make.
I will say
I was very fortunate a few years ago to spend time in the Ralph Lauren reference library. So like basically it's massive. Basically, I can't even imagine how big it was. Essentially, it just looked like a store, right? It's just racks and racks and racks, and it's divided by like kind of here's all the military stuff, here's all the Western stuff, and like they really do have like everything in there imaginable. Some really, really neat stuff.
Like you could go to the store in New York and they were selling like original World War II A2 jackets that is part of the store display. And I think that kind of deeper understanding in that reference collection that you got to see kind of allows you, it's the best way to describe it. A good jazz musician could play any sort of music, but his deep understanding of music is what allows a good jazz musician to improvise well and do something good. And I think the same thing applies to fashion. If you want to improvise, and
I will say
when it comes to fashion, doing this, you have to have that same deep understanding of what you're kind of working with.
I will say the Ralph Lauren Boondockers, those look pretty damn good. Have you ever seen those?
Yeah,
they $500. No thanks. I'll buy some from what price? I'll buy some World War II impression, but they make some. Before we wrap it up,
Yeah.
Fun fact: Josh, you probably know the name, and well, Charles would. Todd Snyder, familiar with the designer
Yeah.
Todd Snyder?
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
Todd Snyder teamed up with PF Flyers in 2016. You remember that run?
Yeah.
He made a run of his recreation of the Jungle Shoe. Once again, they're like $500, but like he actually said, "Hey, let's recreate the World War II olive green Jungle Shoe," and he teamed up with PF Flyers. And I'm looking on them online, and once again, they had overly outrageous price points on them, but it's kind of cool to see that he teamed up with them to try to recreate a modern day version of those shoes.
Yeah. Josh, am I correct in thinking, right? Wasn't it the Todd Center collab with Champion that did the like the blue sweatshirt that
My
you could
God.
use for what's his name on D-Day?
Force Goof. So
Yeah,
yes,
thank you.
they did a recreation of a specific type of sweatshirt that was really common in the 40s.
It's called an after hood.
I
So
did
like
not
It's
know
called an
this.
afterhood because I've often called sweat parkas. Let me grab my gray
So
one.
like you see like I'm wearing a normal hoodie right now, and
Yep.
the hood kind of comes up all the way to the front. On an after hood, it's kind of more like a crew neck sweatshirt that then it's kind of at the hood is added kind of more closer to the shoulder seams.
See,
Gotcha.
here's mine. You kind of see
Yeah,
how
you see it like that.
sweatshirt that someone sewn a hood on, which is nice because I don't know about you, but sometimes like the hood kind of chokes you a little bit in certain
Yeah.
situations. It gives you a lot more room. But Forrest Goof wore a dark blue one with a light blue inside on D-Day. And when Todd Snyder teamed up with Champion to reproduce sweatshirts from the Champion archive, they reproduced
Yeah, I'm
an
trying to find
afterhood
it.
sweatshirt in that color. And I had one, and then my dearly departed Rottweiler destroyed it.
No, I did not know that. No.
So I no longer have it, and they do not pop up on eBay. And I have looked, and I was a little sad because I wanted a blue one for the niche 101st reference, but I also just like them because the afterhood style, because I find it more comfortable and it's a little like vintage
Totally.
sort of thing. And Bronson makes a fantastic one. It's super heavyweight and is like really, really warm. And these are seen being worn by Marine paratrooper instructors, Army paratrooper instructors, and are just common sportswear during the time. But that's kind of like the cool sort of collabs that you see where sometimes going back in time and seeing some vintage styles, I think, and going like, oh, why did we depart from that? And let's make that as something that I'm liking that a number of manufacturers are more doing, like Todd Snyder and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know this wasn't the question, but I think like as far as like companies to look out for too, as far as like people who are making stuff for a fashion audience that could, theoretically be used in this area. I mean, a lot of them are out of Japan, but like, I look at the stuff that like Warehouse and Co. out of Japan is doing, and like, like they do like HBT, like, second pattern HBTs that I think would probably rival like, any repro, that you're getting. And like other stuff like that, like, where there really are, they're making really good high quality stuff at a level that no repro maker in the States is kind of touching.
Yeah. And I think we're in many ways, and this is a longer discussion, I think we're kind of in both a dark spot in terms of the current reproduction market. I think, but at the same time, I think we're in one of the brighter spots just in generally in getting authentic clothes because we're no longer it was in the 1990s and you wanted a reproduction, jacket of some sort. You had to go to one of the few manufacturers, whether it was old World War II impressions or New Columbia,
Mhm.
Let's
But
put a
today-
pause on that. I think
Yeah.
we can clearly do another 2 hours, and so I want to
Yeah.
schedule you
I'm
guys.
sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
no.
We can just go on.
I love this, so we're going to schedule a part 2 episode. We'll wait a
Oh,
few
sure.
weeks, and we'll get
Yeah.
back together because, I mean, we can clear. I mean, we've already done 145 minutes, so we can
Oh,
definitely
man.
do this again. Sadly, I got work
This is
tomorrow.
classic
but
Josh and I.
no, it's perfect.
Go and go.
I love when I have guests on that we can do these long formats, and so we're definitely going to schedule a part 2.
Yeah.
I just want to say this before we wrap up. I was never a suit guy growing up, and because when most people wear suits, they don't fit, right? Unless you go rent a tux for a wedding or something, they don't fit. You guys will love this. Torture. You ready for this? If you guys go on Apple Plus, they remade The Right Stuff a few years back from the movie about the space program. Leonardo DiCaprio, executive producer. You guys remember the movie that was out in the late 80s, early 80s called The Right Stuff?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Well, they remade it into a 10-part miniseries that's still on Apple Plus. They filmed that down here, and I got hired to do 2 episodes as a background actor. I'm in episode 1. I'm clearly behind the principal characters. I'm at a Navy bar, and I'm dressed up in a Navy uniform. You can see me drinking in the background while the 2 principal actors were talking. Episode 4, it's New Year's Eve, 1959. It's the NASA New Year's Eve party, and I'm an extra in that as well. Well, you got to have a suit. So they sent me up to Universal Studios. First off, the wardrobe lady was pissed. She seen my 6'5" ass walking in, and she goes, "I told him we had enough tall people. No more tall people. Tell them no more tall people." She said, "Don't worry, I'll get you taken care of." She measures me out. 2 weeks later, I show up for shoot day. They got a 3-piece 1959 era cut Ralph Lauren suit measured to me. And first time I've ever had a personally measured suit, let alone a Ralph Lauren quality. Wear that for 2 days of shooting, and then I have to give it back. And I can't take it with me. The only thing I got from that shoot is I have the napkin that I had at the naval bar that has the Navy logo on it, and the pack of fake cigarettes they gave me I stole off the set. But I wish I could have kept that goddamn 3-piece Ralph Lauren suit. And that is where I learned, and I had to give this information to the wedding I was at because the guys didn't know. That is where I personally learned about the button rule on jackets.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Unbuttoning when you sit down.
Sometimes, always, never.
And you've only buttoned one of the 2 buttons because it messes up, as Josh was pointing out earlier, the cut and the way that the suit jacket lays. Yeah. And I was at a wedding not too long ago where I had to pay $269 wearing a tuxedo for one day. I'm like, no, just the top button. Don't button the bottom button. I'm like telling it because they're all young. They're all cats in their 20s. They've never worn a nice suit before. And
sure, yeah.
Because, unless you've done it, I just button both of them. I sit down and it's just nope.
They did that in The Crown.
But to that end, this has been 2 hours of 3 men talking about wardrobe, and we're going to wrap it up with another episode. Thank you guys so much. Where can people find you if they want to track you down on social media? I know you have a Substack channel. Where can people track you down and
Oh, sure. I'll go first. Yeah, you can find me like on my personal Instagram, which is like I believe it's Charles_McFarlane. So McFarlane. But you can also find me at Combat Threads. So combat.threads, and you can just put that into either Instagram or into Substack, and you can find me there.
And yeah, you could find me on Facebook at the 100th Infantry Division Reenacted. I'm one of the admins of that page. Or you could
showing me up. I should have said that too.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Or the real way you could find me is if you bug Charles and say, "Hey, can you tell me how to message Josh?" I will get your message, and then because I'm a busy this is going to sound like I'm a busy attorney, I'm probably going to get your message, be like, "Oh, I need to really respond to that when I get home," and then I get home and I'm so fucking tired that I fall asleep in bed.
I'll bug him though. Don't worry.
Yeah.
And as always,
and don't respond for a week. But I'll respond and try to be as helpful as I can. I not as mean as I look.
And as always, you all can head over to WTSPWWII.com and click on the homepage. You'll see the page for this episode where we'll have all the links you need to find them on their social media, as well as to see what these wonderful gentlemen look like. And while you're there, please make sure you click on that Patreon link. Sign up and subscribe. It goes a long way to support what we do here at the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. And not forget, head over to youtube.com, type in D410 Media, and you can find all of our What's the Scuttlebutt podcast content. You can find my other World War II content, my fishing content, and much, much more. Thank you, guys, and we'll be with you all again next week.
This has been a Digital 410 production.